Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Firm. This is a Monday morning edition. I am your host, Alex Gore. I am here with Mark Wainwright. Mark is the founder and principal of Wainwright Insight, not Industries yet, a sales consultant to professional service firms. Leveraging his 20 years of sales and marketing experience, Mark offers fractional sales marketing to firms who sell their expertise. Mark, welcome Inside the Firm.
Thanks, Alex. It's nice to be here. I will the fractional sales management, I think, was the little part there. As most people will likely understand, I'm a recovering marketing guy. I am now a full-on focused sales guy. So yeah, and I know that word just sends shivers down to people's spine. So, but I'm ready to talk about it.
So let's get started with what in your background do you think is necessary for the audience to understand to where you got to the conversation that we're having today?
Good question. Because people who do marketing business development in architecture firms, engineering firms, and they don't really do sales, right? And there's a lot of people who create proposals who are marketing staff members, others that aren't really involved in sales. Sales mostly is, really the steps, the blocking and tackling, all around sales is really done by, firm principals, people who are doers, sellers, that sort of thing, people who are, contracting work, proposing pricing, etc. So I worked in the AEC kind of world for 10 plus years or so, and then I made a shift and I worked outside of the AEC industry in management consulting, and I had a very specific marketing and then selling role. So my career made a big shift, and that was really when I was exposed to what sales is, and I started to be really interested and learn more about sales. Because in management consulting, the firm I was working with, our clients were Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies, and the contracts were huge, six-figure retainer, monthly contracts for, a year, 2 years, selling high dollar, training products and other stuff like that, consulting engagements and things. So that's when I really made the shift. But I really appreciate and love the AEC world, architecture, engineering universe. I have tons of connections and friends and lots of personal relationships throughout that industry. So I said, how can I take these sales skills that I have developed over time, sort of outside the industry, and reintroduce them to architects and engineers who aren't really good at sales, don't really like talking about sales, don't even like the word, but can really benefit from all of this. So I came up with this part-time sales manager for part-time salespeople job, this consulting thing that I'm doing right now called Fractional Sales Management, where I help a various number of firms just a little bit at a time over a long period of time, where I am their sales manager, and I coach and guide them as they learn how to sell better, and I help them build a really organized sort of sales function inside their organizations, which means that they have an organized, rigorous sales pipeline, and they're just organizationally, they're really organized when it comes to finding and winning new work.
Yeah. Could you kind of chunk in your mind the different groupings of sales? And I'll give just a quick example, and I'm sure you'll be able to expand or contract on that. There's the acquisition of clients. There's then the sales process, going through that. And then there is the continuing management, once it flows into there. How do you see that kind of sales pipeline, and how do you kind of break it down?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to look at it. Maybe I'm, as I talk about what sales is to to individuals and organizations, because like I said, it's a bit of a foreign term. The common terms are business development and marketing. And there's, if you start drawing the Venn diagram circles, you're trying to figure out which one's which and where they fit together and all that other stuff. I like to draw sort of a continuum. And on one end is definitely sales and sales related activities. And those are typically things that are, okay, contracts, proposing pricing, developing proposals, having, discovery conversations to come up with these proposals. All those things are definitely sales activities, and they're not promotional in nature. They're more sort of, investigative. And that's really what sales is all about. At the other end of the spectrum, we have marketing activities, which are promotional in nature, which are podcasts, which are, websites, social media, things that are promoting and getting people aware and engaged with your organization. And that's a continuum, right? And at some point along that line, there's probably some overlap and a little bit of fuzziness in the middle there. But there's definitely some overlap between sales and marketing. But at some point, you transition from marketing to sales. And I kind of think of it as that continuum right there. That's how I sort of visualize it. But the way you broke it out into, sales pipeline, sales pipeline management, ongoing, conversations and relationship management with your clients. I think to a degree that's still sales as well. I think a lot of people, if they had to call it something, they might call it business development or client development, this long-term, tending relationships. But I think it is the responsibility for individual doer sellers in firms to be managing individual relationships and maintaining those over time. And I think that you will find that the expertise out in there in the world regarding sales will help you do that as a doer seller rather than the marketing expertise that's out there in the world, which is why my bias is for sales, because I think that in the world of information that we have at our disposal, sales information is mostly useful for the doer seller inside of a professional services firm who has to maintain long-term relationships, develop proposals, present, propose options, present pricing, work through contracts, et cetera. I think the sales information out there in the world is far more useful than, what we see in the industry as far as like marketing information. I hope I got to a reasonable answer for what you said there.
Yeah, and it leads me into another question. When you're looking at architecture or engineering firms, structural, civil, they're sort of in the same boat. What do you typically see as their sales organization? And then what are you trying to, and I mean that in the loose term, and then what are you trying to get them as a goal? And then the third part to that question then is, what are the results or the benefits of this transition?
Yeah. So organizationally, because I look at it a little bit different. I look at individuals and organizations because I'm trying to move both of them forward, and I'll kind of define that a little bit. But organizationally, most organizations are disorganized, meaning that they don't have a clear visibility on new business opportunities. That should be kind of in an organized pipeline. They're kind of all over the place. They don't have a really strong system for vetting those opportunities. They don't have a strong system for advancing those opportunities from a maybe to a contract. There's no process in place. And people always sort of wince a little bit because I use the word process a lot, and people don't like that because a lot of times people are like, oh, I'm just going to shoot from the hip and we're going to get this contract closed. And, we don't like a whole lot of process. But the whole reason process exists is to get better at something over time. Right? The reason you create a process and you do it the same or similar way again and again is to get better at it. Right? That's why a process exists. And if an organization doesn't have a process, that means, if they keep doing different things randomly over time, they're never going to get better at something. Right? So that's why a process exists. So I seek to bring a process of organization and sort of rigor and structure to that whole thing of, a maybe to a contract, and get everybody sort of bought in and aligned to it and moving opportunities forwards. So organizationally, what all that organization gives you, what that structure and that process gives you is it gives you the visibility on your future revenue and your future resource needs that you need in order to make decisions, right? That's why a pipeline is so critical. A lot of times people are making financial decisions and resourcing on contracted work, you should be making important decisions and resourcing your pipeline, right? So if your pipeline extends 3 months, 6 months, 9 months out in the future, however long your pipeline extends, that should be the tool that is helping you make important decisions, from a business standpoint. And that's why a pipeline is so important. You can't just be constantly making these really important business decisions. Who are we going to hire? Who unfortunately are we going to have to let go because there's not enough work? How are we going to invest the resources, or the revenue that we're hoping to earn? How are we going to invest that in the future? Your pipeline gives you kind of the crystal ball, the visibility of your future. And if you're not paying enough attention to your sales pipeline, that's a problem. And you're making decisions in the moment rather than being able to look forward. So that's sort of the business end of things, is you're able to look out into the future with some level of clarity and confidence. And the better and better you get at maintaining a pipeline, the clearer that gets.
Is there a specific management software that you typically recommend, or is a good place for someone to start that is just doing this from the hip?
Oh, are you maybe referring to like a CRM or
Yeah.
something like that? Yeah. Boy, there's just so many. I think here's let's take the simplest business tool that hopefully is out there, right? A spreadsheet, right? Because actually some of the work I do with some of the clients that I work with, we use very simple spreadsheets, and a spreadsheet, is hopefully a shared document that everyone goes to as a single source of information. Hopefully it's updated regularly, and hopefully it provides the accurate information that we can use to make decisions, or it has particular information that people, use as reminders. Okay, so we're expecting this particular opportunity to close in 60 days. I need to be having these types of conversations right now. I need to be having this type of a conversation next. So it helps us build reminders and kind of a cadence of conversations throughout this whole process. And, what most firms fall into, and why, they're constantly searching for, the silver bullet tool out there, Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever tools that people use, is that they think the tool is going to do the work for them, right? So what I recommend firms just use really, really simple tools like a spreadsheet to list all your new business opportunities, because the tool isn't going to do it for you. You have to kind of dig in there and you have to pay attention to it, keep it updated. And I know that's kind of a boring answer. I'm not the I'm not the guy that's going to tell people to go out and spend thousands of dollars on tools that aren't used. And I've mentioned this in the past in other conversations I've had, is that what's most important is that you have a business process and the right types of behaviors in place first before you go looking for a tool, right? So most organizations just need to have some type of a system, some behaviors that are happening inside the organization before they go looking for, a HubSpot or a Salesforce or a Zoho or just in whatever. So you need to have the right types of behaviors happening in the organization before you go doing that.
I can't agree more. A lot of our listeners will probably know we started this firm just a couple years out of college, so relatively young. And what we found when either asking questions or gaining success was people / ourselves were surprised. And I would say I'll just put this on ourselves at the success, because we didn't have the fancy answers. It always came down to, like, what is a simple, straightforward, effective way to do the work?
Right.
What is it? So when you said that, it resonates. What is simple, straightforward, and effective?
Yeah.
And then go from there. I have a question that is for the established business, but the same problem exists when you're trying to start a business. So I'll go for the established business. Let's say, the economy, there's ups and downs, there's push and pulls, there's dry periods and not. Normally firms can last, like there might be a dip. January is typically a dip just because everyone has a Christmas hangover and all that. But let's just say it's longer, or it's in a different time, or the Fed decides to, go to 0.5 interest rates for 4 months, and
Right.
what would be a strategy or advice
Mm,
for getting more clients? And the reason why it's also pertinent to the new someone starting out is because normally a lot of businesses, their clients come from referrals. And what that means is, hey, people I worked for before are either coming back to me for work,
right.
or they're talking to their friend at the gym and they say, hey, I'm going to do this. Um, and honestly, they just come in. Like it just comes in. So when it stops, it's the same question as the person trying to start,
Right.
meaning like, oh, I don't have someone I've done business with for 5 years.
Right.
Because, and then, during now, it's like, oh, I have plenty of people, but they aren't doing anything right now.
Right.
So what's kind of your advice for reaching out? And I think the underlining is like, is there a strategy for cold calls? It's not very fun. People don't like to do them.
Sure.
Long question.
Yeah,
Now your
no,
turn.
it was fine. And it's a good question. And I'll give you kind of, and we can touch on a couple of those things specifically, but the big picture answer is that, you're absolutely right. There is a cyclical nature of everything. And this industry, is completely, sometimes at the will of the economy and other types of things. But a lot of times that cyclical nature, that ups and downs, those hills and valleys, that we see are from the how we practice the craft, how architects or engineers, practice this whole thing, right? And it's win the work, you know, don't do any more business development or sales activity, go and do the work, deliver the work. And then when the work is done or almost done, they think, oh, we got to go get some more work. Right. So so that's the cyclical nature of it, is that there's a ton of time and energy spent going and finding and winning the work. And then there's doing the work. So they switch back and forth. Right. But in order to avoid that, you have to be doing both at the same time. And that doesn't mean you need to be doing the sales, marketing, business development stuff the vast majority of your time, but you need to be doing it a little bit at a time. And frankly, that's where it's a huge priority for what I do. I am working with organizations saying, look, just a little bit at a time, all the time is required in order to, maybe take the tops off of those big hills and start filling up the valleys with them, so we can kind of flatten that out a little bit. There's going to be other things in the world that impact that. There's going to be, larger economic issues, that sort of thing that impact that. But the big picture is, we can't let the work, doing the work, doing the design work, doing the engineering work, whatever it is, prevent us from doing that week in, week out little bit of time spent making calls, having conversations, doing marketing work, etc. Right? And you understand this because you see this podcast and likely other things that you and your organization do, as this constant stream of information that is required for people to, be aware of your organization, get to know you a little bit, and then at some point approach you for help. So it's that consistently thing, and we just lose track of it. I mean, experts and professionals just lose track of it because they're just, they think, oh, I want to go do the work right now. I want to do the engineering, architecture, design work, and they create these hills and valleys for themselves, kind of. And I know there's a bunch of, you asked some questions about some specific things in there about cold calling and all that other stuff. Sure, there's a ton that can be done. You can create, really specific plans around really important clients that you've worked with historically and continue to work with and want to work with even more. You can create specific plans around that. I call those sort of account development plans. You can do prospecting, and I put, making cold calls under this big umbrella of prospecting. Asking for referrals is prospecting. Prospecting is something that an individual doer seller does in a proactive fashion to make connections and hopefully generate new business leads out there. And I don't want to just leave it there, because I know that you mentioned cold calling, and a lot of people think, oh, Mark focuses on sales. He walks into engineering firms and tells everybody they have to start doing cold calls. It's like, well, that's not what I do. But, cold calling, making, cold or just slightly warm telephone conversations, outbound telephone conversations is an important component of prospecting, but it shouldn't be done all by itself. Like you just shouldn't, sit down with a list of 20 people and a bunch of phone numbers and just start making calls. The best type of prospecting is done in a sequence where you put together a logical sequence of interactions. It can be, a social media interaction of some type, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever it is, to start warming up that relationship. You find somebody you want to connect with. It's like, oh, let's go look them up on LinkedIn. When maybe we'll comment on some posts they've put up recently. Create a couple emails that you can send to them that start to warm that relationship up, i.e., they start to be familiar with you, your name, your firm. And then eventually in that sequence, you should pick up the telephone, because then people get to hear your voice and they get to understand that you're just a nice human being. And whether you talk to them or leave them a voicemail or whatever it is, you're constantly increasing the familiarity they have with you and your organization. So when I talk about cold calling, it's never done by itself. It's always done in a sequence of activities of kind of, increasing intensity, maybe we could use that word. And hopefully the result of that prospecting sequence that you've put together is someone is familiar enough with you and your firm that you either have a conversation or at some point in the future they think, oh yeah, I should call Alex. I remember he sent me a few emails and they were pretty useful and he left me that voicemail that one time. He sounds like a pretty reasonable guy. I have a need. Maybe I'll call Alex.
Yeah. So the way that you explained it seems so obvious that they should be, you can call it warm calling.
Yeah.
Is that an actual term that other?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that's why when people say cold calling, I just, I think it's entirely possible for people to make cold calls. I think the probability of success is pretty low, right? Which is why a lot of times when we think about cold calling and that sort of thing, it needs to be done in this incredibly high volume. Right. And it's all that spam junk that you get in your inbox and, through LinkedIn and through whatever other channels, voicemails, everything else, is because it's completely cold and people don't take the time to plan it and warm it up.
Yeah. Targeted warm calling is probably better.
Sure. Sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Let's go switch topic. Well, same topic, but a little bit more precise.
Yeah.
Pricing.
Yeah.
Pricing is key. And I actually kind of want to skip to the meat of it and we can go broad later.
Yeah, sure.
One thing I know you talk about and a lot of advice goes to is pricing options.
Yeah. Right.
And you can talk about that. And I'll give some pushback, not just to push back, but I have a idea that might make it more palatable. And the pushback will probably explain why people don't like it or don't want to do it, but maybe that. Yeah. So could you talk about the value of pricing options, maybe why you think people don't do it as much, and how it kind of works?
Yeah, pricing is so fascinating, and just my little prelude to that specific pricing options conversation is just that I don't think organizations take pricing seriously enough. And that sounds weird because firms like, no, we absolutely do. We work really hard. When we put together a fee proposal or whatever else, it takes us hours and we put a lot of time and energy into it. A lot of times they put a lot of time and energy into it so that they can rationalize that big number they're going to put in front of somebody. They're like, oh yeah, this fee proposal is 6 pages long. Look at this. And the price is $250,000. Sure. I mean, 6 pages of stuff there should rationalize that price. But I digress. Pricing needs to be elevated in importance to the point where your organization has kind of a way you approach it. And one of the components of pricing is pricing options. And whenever I bring up the concept of pricing options and presenting options in price, and note, Alex, I'm going to take a little tangent here. I use the word price and not fee, and we can talk about that if you want to. But price is really, really important rather than fee, because fees are often seen as punitive, and price is not. So. One of the things about price, I talk to firms about pricing and pricing options. I say we have tons of options. We present tons of options. when we're talking to potential clients, and we're going to put together a fee proposal, the end product, the proposal has a ton of things. It's got this component of it. This work we have kind of a range here that they can pick from. It's this work, this first task or this first part of the work is $10,000 to $20,000, depending on the options they choose. This second component is this amount, and then at the very end, we give them all kinds of a la carte options. We say, okay, so there's this component that you could add on to it, or there's an exclusion down there and says, hey, by the way, the pricing that we gave you doesn't include the survey or the structural engineering or the landscape, architecture work, the design work, all these other things. But we can price all those if you want, right? So when I say pricing and pricing options, firms immediately think we provide options. And I say, you provided way too many options, right? Because really what we're talking about when we're talking about sales and selling and pricing is that we have to facilitate the decision-making of the prospective client, because making decisions on stuff like this is really, really hard. So options, and the best way to present options is in a very orderly fashion. And when I recommend firms present options, I recommend that they present 3 price options: good, better, best, low, medium, high, whatever combination. But when options are presented, they are 3 options, and each option has a very discrete single price.
Gotcha. Okay, here's probably some of the pushback that you've already heard. Or not. One of I wouldn't say it's a strategy. I'd say there is it is a kernel of truth, is that there are clients that are ready to buy now. And they are looking for architect, engineer, and they're ready to go. So speed is essential, meaning here you go, here's what you need to do. The second is sometimes even myself with dealing with civil engineers, but I can imagine a client that's doing a house or something like that, or even development. If you have the different options, you implement a speed bump to speed, meaning now you are explaining the different options. And what I do not like when I work with, let's say, subs is like, let's say they exclude surveying, right? Or something like that. And let's say I'm putting together a team in a project and I have civil engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, like, hey, you all know we've done this before, or your firm should have done this before. Give me the fee to get the job done. Which leads to the second thing is, I think some people are afraid, either rightly so or not. Let's say I give 3 options, low, medium, high. And I do have somewhat of a solution. I'm not just trying to, spew negativity here. Let's say a client goes, hey, this is great. I want the low option or the medium option. And in the back of your head, you go, crap. Well, they're in an HOA, and this client seems like they want a lot of hand-holding, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and they actually need the high option, and they need all of these stuff.
Yeah.
So they just picked the $14 option,
right?
When they need the $45 option.
Right.
Now,
and that's the beauty. That is the whole beauty of this, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff going on inside of our heads, inside of it, that we don't recognize, and we'll dig into that. But I don't want to get too far down the road here. But we'll talk about that, and it is called cognitive bias, right? And interwoven with that is also, when we talk about these options, we're also going to talk about designing those options and something called choice architecture, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to touch on the speed thing first, because you brought that up initially. In my experience, and I would posit that time spent at this critical point, up front, setting price, finalizing scope, everything else, is time saved on the back end, right? And the beautiful thing about presenting 3 very clear options is that you're not only showing what prospective clients get with a particular option, you are very clearly showing them what they do not get with other options, right? So that is really, really powerful, because changes and additions and other things like that down the road often come from just people assuming that certain things were included when they were not, and we weren't explicit enough about that up front. We usually say everything's, here's all the stuff that's included and here's the price, but we don't ever say, okay, and here's all this other stuff that's not included, and here's the price of that. But when you put together a really nice 3-option proposal assembled in a nice 3-option table, you are being explicit about things that are excluded, which is really powerful. So you can go back to that original document, not just the scope, but also that fee proposal up front, and say, look, option 3 that you did not choose included these 2 things that you are now, that we're now talking about, that you want to maybe include. And they say, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. So what's the price of that? Well, it's the difference between option 2 and option 3. And they say, okay, let's do option 3. The other thing I will say is that if people are ready to go and they're, in time and speed is really, really critical to them, and, the dollars are secondary, that can happen. That's a good scenario. I would say that any proposal you're putting forward with them, you are leaving money on the table. Without providing an option that is a very high option. Maybe it's not even an option that they're going to consider, but just presenting a high option that makes them think for a second and say, oh, okay, all right. So there are some other things involved with this that I haven't really thought about. So I think that, you assemble a price, they say go, you're on your way, and everybody's happy. That's totally fine. I guarantee you in that situation, you're leaving dollars on the table. And the trick is, when someone is completely focused on time and speed, it is going to cost more, right? So I think there's always that need to say, okay, so we're going to do this fast. You want to move quickly, and there's this extra element that has to do with price, which is a little counterintuitive, because since most organizations are basing their price on effort, they think if something is faster, it's cheaper, but that shouldn't be how it is, right? If you're trying to accelerate a process that you typically, takes you 10 months, and you're trying to cram that into 8 months or whatever else, there should be an additional price associated with that, because you're having to do things you wouldn't normally do. So that's a little counterintuitive. And again, and that gets back to, and I won't go off on a tangent about, the issues of cost plus and basing price on effort. But anyway, so the last couple of things I mentioned that we can talk about a little bit, and why pricing helps to how pricing 3 options helps this whole process, is cognitive bias and choice architecture. We can talk about that as you'd like.
Let's remember that.
Yeah.
But here's my question. Let's say I'm making up a let's just use a house, for example, in architecture, right?
Great. Yeah.
Would you recommend then that your lowest price is what they need to actually get the project done? Your medium price, then add some stuff, and your third price adds even more. I think what people think, and I could be totally wrong, is like, okay, the medium one is where I'm going through. Here's everything they need, right? And then you could take the strategy like, okay, they could get by if I take a couple things off, and it could be better if I add a couple things. Yeah. So I'm wondering which one should be the one that you think that they need. And then second question to that is, what do you commonly see as either add-ons or takeoffs of those tiers?
Yeah. So first question, simply, and I would say most commonly, you're probably trying to nudge and steer someone towards a middle option. And let me again clarify why it's important to have 3, is that if you give someone one option or one choice, they have nothing to compare it to. People are unable to create sufficient context and comparison in our brains. So if you give them one price, they will have to go somewhere else to get a comparative price. They have to. If we give them one price, we are forcing them to go compare it to something else, right? So they'll go talk to another firm, or or they'll talk to a friend and say, hey, what'd you pay? So people cannot make comparisons out of nothing. So it's critical that we're at least trying to give them something to frame that price. And Three Options does a beautiful job of framing that price. And I'm going to talk, and I think people are kind of, kicking this around their head and saying, oh yeah, we sort of do options, we do options. And I'm talking about 3, 1, 2, 3, right? And I think that's really critical. And the 3 is beautiful because it frames everything. It frames that, and let's talk about that central option. So sure, option 1 can be what it takes to get the project done. Option 2 maybe is a preferred option that you start to add, whatever things into. And the third option is the kitchen sink. And I'll weave in a couple cognitive bias things, right?
Yep.
One example of cognitive bias is something called the decoy effect. And the decoy effect is where if you're faced with 3 options, 3 choices, 3 numbers, let's say, one of those can be something that impacts the other 2. Someone will look at a particular choice or a particular number, and inevitably the comparisons start to rise up to arrive with the other 2. You would think if people are thinking about things rationally, each choice you give them, choice A, B, and C, are all decided upon, with their own merit. They're all considered independently, but they never are. There's always one option in there that influences decision making on the other 2, right? So, for example, your third option, if you had a kitchen sink option, you think, oh my gosh, that is crazy expensive. Suddenly, what happens? The 2 other options seem much more reasonable. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's what happens in our heads, is that, the first option's $150,000, the second one's $225,000, and the third one's $500,000. They think, oh, I can't spend $500,000, but suddenly that 225 or whatever it is sounds suddenly really reasonable, right? So that's a decoy option. So that's one of the tricks, one of the cognitive biases that's at play here, is that you should have a particular option. It could be a low option, a high option, whatever, that is going to be your decoy. There's other things that are happening, like there's loss aversion is a cognitive bias, where the pain of losing things and having things taken away from us is a much more powerful motivator than the pleasure of gaining things. Mm-hmm. So in this 3 option idea is, if you present, the full-blown kitchen sink first, and then you start presenting other options, they're thinking, okay, wait, what did we just lose when we went from the highest option to the next option? So that's what's happened.
Yeah, quick question then.
Yeah.
And I'll let you keep ranting because I'm loving this. Why then, when there's a tier, do they put the high option on the right-hand side and not on the left-hand side?
Yeah, you can do either. You can do either. I think it's entirely possible to reorder, because again, that speaks to another cognitive bias, which is the ordering effect or the primacy effect.
Yep.
And what that cognitive bias is, the very first piece of information that you come across influences the subsequent pieces of information, right? So if you put a high option first, and most firms don't want to do this because they're thinking, oh, I want to walk someone up rather than throwing this big, huge number at them first and scaring them away.
Yeah.
But, if you're having this, proposal conversation where you're presenting these different options, I have no issue with starting with, a kitchen sink high option first and then moving down, because you start to employ this loss aversion. People are thinking, oh, we're going to lose that. If we move to option 2, we're going to lose this. And then they go, option 3, we're going to lose what? Right? That is a more powerful motivator than starting with the just get the job done option and moving to 2. And they say, no, I don't, I don't need that. I don't need that. Right. So, and then when they go to the third option, they're like, oh, we definitely don't need that. So that's, going on in our heads. And people are thinking, when people make really big decisions like this, they are completely rational and they are using a very conscious mode of rational, logical thinking. They are not. They are not. The same, forces that are at play in our head when we're deciding, to buy a $500 television set are working in our heads when we're making a $500,000 or $1 million or multi-million dollar, purchasing decision. It is the same stuff, right? And it's not the job of the consultant, architect, engineer, whatever else to take advantage of those. It's important that they are aware of them and that they are leveraging, how, this sort of irrational stuff is going on in buyers' heads, and to be able to kind of mold that. It's like, oh, okay, so if I present options in this particular way, high, medium, low, whatever else, people are going to be perceiving a loss aversion thing. So, that's how I might want to order it. So, it's really, really interesting, and I think that you can leverage all of this. And to use your very first example, is that where someone purchased someone chose the first option, which was a low cost option, and you said, oh, they really should have picked the second option or the third option because that's really going to serve them better. There are things you can use these tools and these nudges and these different cognitive biases to make sure that you're steering them towards the best option.
Last part of that question, what are you seeing that people are either doing as subtractions or add-ons, depending on how you look at it?
Well, this speaks to value. And the reason this speaks to value is, for example, value is the maximum amount someone is willing to pay for something to gain their desired outcome or their desired result, right? That's sort of that's the definition. But in this situation, if you present various options and there's various elements of those options, you need to be sure that the prospective buyer, places value on any added elements or added items in your kind of table of options, or you're not going to get very far, right? If let's use an absurd answer here. It's like, okay, so here's our low option where your house is going to be white, right? Our medium option, your house is going to be blue. Right? Our high-end option, your house is going to be a lovely gold, right? If they place no value on blue or gold and ultimately wanted white, then you didn't discover that early enough on, right? Conversely, they place the highest value on white, and white is some premium, for a house color. And I know this is an absurd answer, but we can connect this to other stuff. If the third option, if your kitchen sink high option is the only one that offers white, then that will be influencing their decision, and they will place a higher amount of value on that kind of kitchen sink option, right? So you need to be careful coming into your pricing, your pricing options, to be adding or taking away, excluding or including various things that they place some value on. Because if you're continually adding stuff, I know that here's an example that kind of came to me the other day when I was thinking about this, leading up to our conversation, is that your office, and I know a lot of your expertise, you guys do a lot of talking about Revit, right? Technology tools, how you use those tools in your design work. It is entirely possible that you may have two different clients, and one will place a high amount of value on that so that they will be willing to pay some premium on your work. You may come across other clients who do not care, about the sausage making, about what happens, behind the curtain. And you're thinking, well, okay, we've spent 30 minutes explaining all this, and how we use Revit and how it's important and how modeling is critical to construction and everything else, and they don't care. Like it doesn't matter to them at all. And that's a significant investment in time and effort on your end. And someone says, look, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me, none of that. So if you're saying, if your options, and I know that this may not be, a real way to do this, but if one of your options is like, okay, this option you don't get Revit, and this option you do get Revit, someone who places a high amount of value on that is going to say, oh, I have to have option B because that uses Revit, and I know that's going to, all the benefits involved with that and everything else. The other person who doesn't value it at all, they could care less, right?
Yep.
So hopefully, I don't know if that makes sense. That example makes sense, but yeah, that's where we have to have these really critical sales discovery conversations to really understand what people place value on. And then that flows into our pricing options so that we're able to leverage the different elements of work to be done relative to the value they place on them.
Yep. Awesome. I thought everything you said was extremely insightful. If people want to know more, where should they go? If people want to connect with you and work with you, where should they go?
Well,
And any
yeah,
parting thoughts you want to give the audience, the floor is yours.
thanks. It has been a pleasure. I always love chatting up pricing and all this other stuff. There's a lot of pricing, great resource information out there. I'm happy to talk to individuals about price. It's like I mentioned, it's just endlessly fascinating for me. I have a hopefully useful website at wainwrightinsight.com. I am a frequent flyer, maybe on LinkedIn. So if people want to find me and connect with me there, that'd be great. It has been a pleasure chatting with you. You guys are doing a great job on your podcast. So keep up the great work, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.